Hi there, and a very warm welcome to this week's video, in which we are going to tackle a long-standing request, which is foam shading. So we are going to take C4D and Octane for a spin and shade some foam here. And judging from the reaction on the internet, I think this is going to be a banger. So let's grab your foamy coffee and let's keep going. Alrighty, let's have a look what we're going to do today. So on screen you can already see the foam shader and it's looking rather complex, but it actually isn't that complex. You just need a bit of a trick up your sleeve, and if you know about that, it opens the doors for a lot of different shaders. So today, when we go to Cinema 4D, you can see now we have this lump of geometry hanging around here. And what you get out of it is this nice foam shader with bubbles and nice volumetrics inside. So let's dive right in and get this shader going. Before we move on, I think a couple of credits are due. So when I was suggested to make a foam tutorial, I looked into it by Googling, and this was one of the search results. And this showed me what CG was capable of in terms of foam. I didn't download and look into this asset as I wanted to create my own shader, but I think that those approaches are not too dissimilar from each other. Further credit goes out to Dino and Lino but also Ricky from the Octane team, because those helped me to get the final components together to make this shader possible. You will see in a minute what I'm talking about. So thank you for all of you and your help and making this possible. So now let's go on and actually go into the shader. Okay, let's finally break this down and make this work. So let's give an overview over the shader. Basically, this is a mixed noise shader that both works in a volume and on a surface level. So let's break this down by turning off the surface here. And you can see we have a volume now with holes inside of that, and we need a surface. And when I go to the surface shader and set it from a specular to a glossy shader, and then also disable the opacity, you can see what I mean. So now on the surface level, we just have those holes connected with those bubbles on top, or those thin film layers here. So we need to have both the surface here, and then underneath the surface we need to have a volume that resembles the foaminess inside of the foam. So let's start with the foam bit first here. In terms of geometry, let's start from scratch by deleting the old geometry and then create a cube here. I trust you can do the lighting on your own. Let's go with a 15:3:15 and a subdivision on the X and Z axis here. And then what we want to do is create a polygon object from that by hitting C. Let's jump outside of the camera, go into point mode and selection mode, and then actually select the back half here and get this to a value of 7.5 and also a value of 1.5, so it tapers off at the end. And then what we want to do next is move this point here a little bit to the side. So I'm holding down Shift to be incremental. And also this one here a little bit in, something like that. This looks kind of okay. So last but not least, let's create a SDS object to get the rounded shape here going. And then we can go back inside of the camera. Let's think for a second what we actually want to do here. So we want to have a volume in the shape of an object, no matter what the object is. And secondly, what we need to have is a way to control its density by a texture or a noise. My first instinct was to use a subsurface scattering shader, but this uses a uniform density that isn't controllable via a shader, so this wouldn't work. And this is where the credit for Dino, Lino and Ricky comes in, because they provided me with a different way to do this. So let's explore that. When we hit render, as expected, we can see our object here. So the trick to get a volume is to right click on the SDS object, then extensions, and create a Octane object tag here. Then go to particle rendering. Yes, it's not that intuitive, and then go to the scroll down and go to Mesh to Volume. Nothing has changed yet because we don't have a volume shader in there, so let's create a standard volume shader here, and we can see now we have a faint volume popping up. Let's explore what's going on in there and make this look a little bit more like foam by going to the node graph symbol here and open up our nodes for the volume shader and then tinker around with those values here. To make this a little bit more visible, what we can do is go to the volume step length and actually get another 0 after the comma, and you can see this gets us a little bit closer to what we want. You can go even further with this and add another 0, but then you increase your render time significantly, so you can find a balance here depending on the size of your object. Next, let's talk about the density here. So if we take that out, you can see that our object's bounding box is now the volume. So what the density is actually doing is giving us the boundary condition between the outside and the inside of our polygon object here. Obviously, we need to leave that in here. Let's go to the scatter here and make it pure white, as foam is usually known to be white and not dark gray. Also, what we need to do is delete our density out here because this is feeding our scattering also with values. And as soon as we delete that out here, we are getting a nice bright white. If you are a little bit familiar with densities, a value of 1000 is quite high. And I would actually expect a higher density than what I'm seeing right here. And the culprit for that is the transparency or transparent here. So what we need to do is get this to pure black. And now I'm getting the density levels that I'm actually expecting. For those of you who know your volumes, you already know what this stepping here indicates. And for those uninitiated, yes, it's voxel size. So this is a voxel based volume. Fortunately, in the Octane object tag, we have a setting for this. So if this is too coarse, and this also is dependent on your scene size, you can set it to a smaller range. For example, for me, a 0.2 centimeter value was enough to get going. Don't be alarmed that this is still visible. We are going to get rid of that mostly with our noises later on. Speaking of noise, let's actually make some noise, and I mean that in the best possible way. So noise, here we go, and we are going with a C4D noise because this has the Voronoi pattern that we need, and I don't want to go with my OSL script here. So let's go and get the Voronoi 1, and yes, it's cut off, but you can see what we are doing. Also, what I want to do is get a projection and a transform. And if you are a viewer of the channel for a longer time, you know that we are going with the trusted XYZ to UVW here. And then on the scale, let's go with a 0.03 here. You barely can see there's something going on. And this is because we are remapping our density now from 0 to 1 and not with the value that was in there before, which was 1000. To get up to the range that we need, let's use exactly that. A range node. Here we go, range, and this is mapping the range from our input to a output. So what we want to do is get the output to a maximum value of 100, as 1000 was too high anyway. Now you can still barely see the noise, and this is because of the lack of contrast. So let's use another one of my favorite nodes, which is the gradient. So here we go, Octane gradient. Let's feed this in here. And if I raise the dark values here, so I clamping that off, you can see there's more density loss here and we are getting our nice bubbles. You can of course experiment around with this. I already know my values from the shader I made before. So I'm going with a 40 to 45 value here. This is giving us a nice sharp indication of our bubbles. Here we go. You don't have to be a master in observation to see that we only created our big bubbles. So if you're wondering where the other bubbles come from, this is a very repetitive process, as we need a different noise for every bubble size that we bring in here. So I'm going with you through this for one size and then we go fast forward from there. And then I'm going to show you the values so you can put them in your shader. So what we want to do is create a multiply node, or just get it from here, and then create another branch of our noise here, and then multiply those both together. Now, this is not creating anything new right now, but once I resize this above noise here to 0.01, you can see there now is a new set of bubbles forming. So let's get this cleaned up here a little bit. So it really depends how detailed you want your noise to be, how often you're going to repeat that. In my shader, I used 5 different noises, so 4 different multiplies. So let's do this in a fast forward kind of way. And what I want to do is go with a touch shading layout, because this gives you a little bit more of a larger display of what's going on here. Let's go over the sizes here. So we started out with a 0.03 value, then we did a 0.01 value for the next noise, then got down to 0.005, 0.0025, and last but not least 0.00125. As you might have noticed, this looks a little bit loose now, so too much air inside. So what I want to do is get to the 3 last gradients and change their values to a value of 30 to 35 instead of 40 to 45. And if we render now, you can see this is looking quite nice now. The only thing I want to change for the volume right now, and you can change that to your liking of course, is go with the max output here and actually set this down to a value of 15 or 20. So it is a little bit more translucent and less dense. So the only thing that's missing right now is the outer shell, so those glossy parts where the bubbles are forming. Let's do this next. Wait, hold your horses. I want to do one more thing, and this is exchange all of those projections from all of the noises with one projection, because this makes stuff easier in the end when we have a rotation, scale, and position to our object and make this all coherent. So here we go. Now we can go and copy all of this actually and move it to a shader. Alright, it's surfacing time. So other than in cycles, we need to duplicate our object, because in Octane, this object cannot be a volume and a surface at the same time. So let's do this and actually call it the foam surface here. And what we also need to do is delete the tag where we made the volume in. So we get our surface back and then create a material. And this is a glossy material for now, so we can see a couple of things. So if we go inside of our glossy material, paste our nodes here, then select them all and move them down. And then plug in that into the diffuse and also assign the material. You can see we have some black dots here. And if I turn on and off the surface, you can see those are exactly at the positions where we have those holes in our volume. Now, this only works when the objects are in the world origin, and this is true for now. So this is because when we move our object here where the volume is inside, the volume slides through, while when we move our main surface here, the dots will keep the position of the main object. We will deal with it later, but for now, this is fine. Let's go with it and shade with it like we want it. So let's actually turn off our volume, turn on our object here, and then go and rename the material to, and then go with the right size here. Here we go. I guess a lot of you have been thinking that already. Let's go with a displacement. Let me show you what will happen if we take our procedural texture and pipe it into displacement. Yes, that is correct, nothing. And this is because our displacement is set to texture displacement, which can only take in bitmaps in UV coordinates. Since we don't have both of these, we need to set this to vertex displacement and actually use our vertices to displace our object. This also will be the most resource-hungry part of our scene, so we need to be a little bit careful in what we do next, and this is raise the subdivision levels here. So if we raise that, we give the object more subdivisions and therefore more vertices to work with to get the displacement right. But if you set this too high, this will bulk down your scene and also take a lot of resources on your GPU. So I'm going with a value of 4 now, and you can see, yes, of course, this effect is inverted, but you can see we have a good definition now as well. Let's go actually with the same principle that we already used in our volume shader. So let's go and just plug in the biggest noise here to set up our bubbles, and then later spread that to all the other noises. Also, let's unplug the diffuse here so we can see just the displacement. Now, what I want to do here is go to the gradient and actually change something. For example, bring the black slider wholly to the left, and this gives us a bubbly surface already, but it's inverted. So we need to bring black to white and white to black. And what do you know? We have some bubbles forming on the surface. But not only that, we can make it even better. So what we can do to make it better is go to the interpolation here and make it cubic to make the bubbles a little bit softer. But then also what we can do is bring in some color correction. So let's see if we can find it in here. Color correction, bring it in here, and actually change the gamma to a lower one, 0.4545 here. And you can see now they are starting to get bubbly. Next, let's have a look what happens if we mix the larger noise that we just did with the next smaller noise. So what I want to do is get the nodes that we just arranged through to the smaller noise. Here we go. And then into the multiply. And from the multiply, obviously, to the displacement. And you can see that we only see those smaller noise bubbles turning up. So this is basically not the way to do that. And if you think about it, you might think that the add shader is the way to go. So let's try this instead. Let's add both of those together and then also feed that to the displacement. And yes, this is better, but now we have small bubbles on top of the large ones. So this is also not what happens in reality. So in reality, the larger ones are left alone by the small ones, and we need to find a way to do that in our shader. What I want to do first here is go to my gradient and make those smaller bubbles a little bit lower because they're quite pointy right now. So let's go to the white port and go with a value of 40. So we get a nice size transition here. Now let's take care of the small bubbles intersecting with the larger ones by getting a compare. Here we go. We need a compare node with the mode greater than. And what we need to do is stick in the larger noise in the input A and the if true statement, and the lower noise or the smaller one in the input B and the if false statement. And if I go ahead and take this into my displacement, you can see now the smaller bubbles leave alone the larger ones. So in the following time lapse, what I'm going to do is create the height of the nodes as well as sticking those all in comparison and then go for the displacement after that. Alright, almost done here. Let's also go over the changed values. So in the 3 last smallest noises, I changed the white value to 15, 5, and 1. And this is pretty much it. So last but not least, what you can do is go to your displacement and set auto bump to on. So if we set auto bump, all the missing resolution is then taken over by the bump. So we can get this nice look here. Let's actually bring this material home in 3 easy steps. So the first step is the film width. So I want to get the soap bubble effect going. So let's go and actually change that to a metallic shader. And we need to get the specular map up to 1 to get the metallic effect in order to see the film width better. To get the variation we need, what I actually want to do is bring in a noise. And this time I'm going for a Octane noise, and then pipe it into the film width. But this is not 3D right now, so what we need to do is go to projection and get our trusted XYZ to UVW. And if the film width is too uniform here, what you can do is just scale it down a tad. And this is looking great for now. You can play around with this to your liking, but I'm leaving at this. So let's take care of making this shader transparent. Step 2, to get rid of those plane areas, since we want to only see those bubbles reflecting, let's actually bring in a Octane gradient here and then choose the same map that we used for our displacement, go into opacity and then actually go to the white value here and set this to be 1%. So very close to the dark value. And this makes all the bubbles show up, but all the plane areas be transparent. And drumroll, as a third and a last step for this material, what we are going to do is make this material from metallic into a specular material, since bubbles are, as far as I know, not metallic. So here we go, but now they have caustics and everything, but we don't want that as bubbles are thin film. So let's go to common and set the fake shadows to on and thin film also to on. And there we have our bubbles. And now if we turn on our foam, what do you know? We have foamy bubbles. Okay, so if you paid attention, there's one more thing we need to take care of. So now if I move my objects, there is the sliding issue in which the volume is sliding through while the bubbles are staying fixed on the surface object. So let's go back here. And what we actually need to do in order to make this work is create a null and sum up our objects here. So with those objects inside the null, it's really important to have all of those axes centered. If they're not centered, this won't work. So let's call this foam actually. Here we go. And then what I want to do is go into our foam shader, so in our volume shader, then move back here to our texture projection. And this was the reason why we got all of those together into one node here, because now we can go and set the foam as a target here. And then we can move our object. So to better see that, right now it's still moving through. And the reason for this is that the foam here is actually not updating. So what we can do here is in the tag, go to main and then force update enabled. And as soon as we've done that, now you can see this is working as intended, but it's a little bit finicky. So you have to be a little bit careful with the hierarchy here and what you do to that. But other than that, we can actually go ahead and fine-tune this a little bit better. So for example, we can turn this a little bit to the side so we have a thinner part on one side and move it a little bit down. So this makes the foam shader come alive. So if you have thicker and thinner portions in there, you can also use a displacer on that. By the way, the SLV scene where I took my letters and make them foam is also available on Patreon, so you can have a look how I did that there. And this was it, the great foam tutorial. I hope it gave you everything that you needed. Obviously, there's a lot more in store that you can do with this technique, for example, sponges or even industrial foam. Please tag me on Instagram or Twitter if you ever post something you did from this tutorial. I'm very curious seeing what you come up with. And now it's time to thank those people who are responsible for making this video possible, my Patreons. Especially my €50 tier subscribers, Shields Augustinen and Leon Studio TV. I can only repeat myself and really thank you for your massive support. Also, my €15 tier subscribers, Render King Alessandro Bonchio, Alessio De Vecchi, Bavana, BVR, Chris Fritchie, Christian Grajewski, Erbe Plus Academy, George Luna, Harish Pavaskar, Just a Frickin', Chris Clemson, Ludger, Nico Straub, Part 1 of 2, Quark Andang, Raiko, Renato Marquez, Reshock, Shamus Johnson, Shiro 2049, Terry Wayne Ranson, Vitar Terjeson, Yasin Rupp, and Shibor Shang. Welcome to the backstage cleaning room. If you're still watching, thank you so very much for still being with me. I say that every time, but I really mean it. As this is a large topic, if you still have questions, don't shy away asking questions in the comments down below. I always monitor them and try to answer all of them. If you want to show your support, this is a very easy one. Let's post some bubbles in the comments. Other than that, thank you once more. A great start into next week and an amazing week to you. And a happy foam party to you all. Bye.